The stagecoach rattled into Panamint, California, on a sweltering August afternoon in 1878, carrying two women who would soon discover that the fragile threads of correspondence had woven a tangled web of mistaken identities and misplaced promises. Natalie Crawford pressed her gloved hand against the dusty window, her heart thundering as she caught her first glimpse of the mining town nestled in the harsh embrace of the Panamint Mountains. The settlement sprawled across the desert floor like a collection of sun-bleached bones, its wooden buildings defiant against the unforgiving landscape. She had traveled from Boston with nothing but 3 trunks, a carefully folded letter from her intended husband, and dreams of a new life far from the suffocating expectations of Eastern society. Beside her sat another woman, younger by perhaps 2 years, with auburn hair that caught the afternoon light like polished copper. Eleanor Hayes clutched her own letter, her green eyes bright with a mixture of excitement and terror that Natalie recognized in herself. They had discovered their shared destination somewhere outside Sacramento, and the coincidence had seemed charming at first. 2 mail-order brides, both heading to the same dusty California town. They had laughed about it, sharing their hopes and fears during the long journey west. Now, as the stagecoach lurched to a halt outside the Desert Rose Hotel, that laughter seemed like something from another lifetime. "This is it," Eleanor whispered, smoothing her travel-worn skirts. "Our new beginning." Natalie nodded, though her throat had gone tight with apprehension. She was 24 years old, a woman considered nearly past marriageable age by Boston standards, especially after the scandal that had driven her west. Her father's business had collapsed spectacularly, taking with it her reputation and any prospect of a respectable match. The advertisement in the matrimonial newspaper had seemed like Providence itself. Samuel Peterson, a prosperous rancher seeking a refined wife to share his life in California. His letters had been thoughtful, intelligent, painting pictures of a life that seemed almost too good to be true. The driver opened the door with a creak of protesting hinges, and dust swirled in the afternoon heat. Natalie stepped down first, her boots sinking slightly into the soft dirt of the main street. The town smelled of horse manure, wood smoke, and something else she could not quite identify, something wild and ancient that seemed to rise from the very earth itself. Men were already gathering, drawn by the arrival of the stage. Their faces were weathered, their eyes curious and hungry in a way that made Natalie's skin prickle with unease. She straightened her spine, lifting her chin with the dignity her mother had drilled into her since childhood. "Miss Crawford," a voice cut through the murmur of the growing crowd. She turned to see a man approaching, his suit dusty but well-tailored, his face round and pleasant beneath a carefully maintained mustache. He removed his hat, revealing thinning hair slicked back with pomade. "Yes, I am Natalie Crawford. Samuel Peterson, at your service." He smiled, but the expression did not quite reach his eyes. They flickered over her face, her figure, calculating in a way that made her stomach clench. "I trust your journey was not too arduous." "It was long but manageable," she replied, extending her hand. His grip was damp, perfunctory. "And you must be Miss Hayes." He turned to Eleanor, who had descended from the coach with her own trunks. "How fortunate that you both arrived safely." Eleanor's brow furrowed slightly. "You were expecting me as well." "Expecting?" Samuel's confusion seemed genuine. "I am afraid there must be some misunderstanding. I sent for Miss Crawford." A new voice interrupted, gruff and impatient. "Then that means Miss Hayes is mine." A second man pushed through the crowd, and Natalie felt her heart sink further. He was tall, painfully thin, with eyes that darted nervously and hands that fidgeted constantly with the brim of his hat. There was something unsettling about him, something that made her instinctively step closer to Alina. "Martin Hayes," the man announced. "You wrote to me, agreeing to be my wife." Alina's face had gone pale. "I wrote to Martin Hayes, yes, but your letters described a ranch, horses, a home in the foothills." "I have all those things," Martin insisted, his voice taking on a wheedling quality. "Well, I will have them soon enough. Just need a few more good strikes in the mine, and then everything I promised will come true." The two women exchanged glances, and in that moment, Natalie saw her own horror reflected in Alina's eyes. Something was terribly wrong. The men standing before them bore little resemblance to the thoughtful, prosperous husbands their letters had promised. "Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private," Samuel suggested, his jovial tone forced. "Ladies, if you would accompany us to the hotel. I have arranged rooms where you can refresh yourselves before we make any formal arrangements." Natalie wanted to refuse, to climb back into that stagecoach and demand to be taken anywhere else. But where would she go? She had spent nearly all her money on the journey west. Boston held nothing for her but shame and poverty. She had staked everything on this new beginning. She picked up her smallest trunk, the one containing her most precious possessions, and followed Samuel toward the hotel. Behind her, she heard Alina's reluctant footsteps and Martin's continued nervous chatter about his future prospects. The Desert Rose Hotel was better than she had expected, with a lobby that showed signs of former grandeur, even if the carpets were now faded and the furniture scarred by hard use. Samuel procured keys from the desk clerk and led them upstairs to adjacent rooms. "I will call for you at 7 for supper," he announced. "We can discuss the arrangements then. Martin, you are welcome to join us, of course." As soon as the door closed behind them, Alina slipped into Natalie's room, her composure finally cracking. "This is a nightmare," she breathed, sinking onto the narrow bed. "That man, Martin, he is not what I expected at all. His letters were so different, so confident and established. But that person downstairs looked half mad with desperation." Natalie moved to the window, looking down at the street below. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. "Samuel is not what I expected either. The man who wrote to me seemed thoughtful, educated. The man downstairs was looking at me like I was merchandise to be evaluated. What are we going to do? I do not know." Natalie pressed her forehead against the warm glass. "I cannot go back to Boston. My family has nothing left. This was supposed to be my salvation." Alina was quiet for a long moment. "My situation is similar. My father died last year and my stepmother made it very clear I was no longer welcome. I thought coming west, marrying a rancher, it seemed like an answer to prayer. Now I am beginning to wonder if I have made a terrible mistake." A knock at the door made them both jump. Natalie opened it cautiously to find a young Mexican woman with a pitcher of water and fresh towels. "Mr. Peterson sent these up, miss. Said you would want to wash before supper." "Thank you." Natalie pressed a coin into the woman's hand, one of her few remaining. "Can I ask you something?" The woman hesitated, then nodded. "Samuel Peterson, the man who arranged for my room, what is his reputation in this town?" The woman's eyes flickered with something that might have been pity. "He owns the general store, does well enough for himself, but he has been through 3 mail-order brides in the past 2 years. Natalie felt ice form in her stomach. "What happened to them?" "The first one left within a week. Took the next stage out, did not even wait to get her trunk. The second one lasted a month before she ran off with one of the miners. The third one, she stayed longest, nearly 3 months, but she left too eventually. All I can tell you is none of them looked happy." After the woman left, Natalie and Alina stared at each other in stunned silence. 3 brides, Alina finally said. "And what about Martin? Did you think to ask about him? I should have. Natalie moved to the wash basin, splashing lukewarm water on her face. It did little to wash away the grime of travel or the growing sense of dread. We need to think clearly. We cannot make any hasty decisions, but we also cannot blindly commit to marriages that might be disastrous. So, what do you suggest? We go to supper. We listen, we observe, and we ask questions. Real questions, not the polite nothings we were taught to exchange. If we are to marry these men, we have a right to know exactly what kind of life awaits us. Alina nodded slowly. And if we do not like what we discover, then we find another option. Somehow. The words sounded braver than Natalie felt, but she had not traveled across an entire continent to surrender without even trying to take control of her own fate. They helped each other dress for supper, choosing their simplest gowns since their trunks had not yet been brought up from the stage. Natalie pinned up her dark hair, noting the way the journey had left her skin sun-touched despite her bonnet, freckles blooming across her nose in a way that would have scandalized her mother. Alina looked equally travel-worn, but there was a determined set to her jaw that suggested she was not as fragile as her delicate features might imply. Samuel and Martin were waiting in the hotel dining room, which was mercifully free of the rough miners and cowboys who crowded the saloons down the street. A table had been set near the window, covered with a cloth that had seen better days but was at least clean. The meal was simple but adequate. Beef stew, fresh bread, coffee that was too bitter but blessedly hot. Samuel dominated the conversation, talking about his store, his plans for expansion, his standing in the community. He made no mention of previous brides, and Natalie did not bring it up directly. Instead, she asked careful questions about the household he maintained, his daily routine, his expectations for a wife. With each answer, her unease grew. He wanted a shopkeeper's wife, someone to tend the store while he pursued business opportunities. Someone to keep his accounts, cook his meals, warm his bed, and ask no inconvenient questions. He spoke of her potential duties the way one might discuss the capabilities of a new piece of equipment. Martin was even worse. His wild promises tumbled over each other in a desperate cascade. He would strike it rich any day now. He had a claim that was sure to pay out. He just needed a little more time, a little more luck. Meanwhile, Alina would live in his 2-room shack on the edge of town, waiting while he spent 16 hours a day underground, chasing dreams of silver that would probably never materialize. By the time the meal ended, Natalie felt physically ill. This was her future. This was what she had traveled so far to claim. The weight of it pressed down on her chest like a physical force. "Ladies, I am sure you are exhausted from your journey," Samuel said, standing and offering his hand to help Natalie from her chair. "Perhaps tomorrow we can visit the preacher and make arrangements for the weddings. No need to delay, I think. You came here to be married, and married you shall be." "I would like a few days to settle in," Natalie heard herself say, "to become acquainted with the town and with you." "Surely there is no harm in a brief courtship." Samuel's smile tightened. "I paid for your passage, Miss Crawford. I believe that entitles me to some consideration of my own timeline." The words hit her like a slap. She had not known he paid for her ticket. The agent in Boston had arranged everything, and she had assumed the cost was part of the standard service. "I was not aware of that arrangement," she said carefully, "but I am sure you understand that marriage is a significant commitment. A few days to ensure we are compatible seems only reasonable." 3 days, Samuel conceded, though his expression suggested he was not pleased. "After that we proceed with the wedding." Martin was nodding eagerly. 3 days is fine. Good even. "Give Miss Hayes time to see what a good provider I will be. I will bring you flowers," he added, turning to Alina. And I will take you to see the claim. You will see the potential, I promise. As they climbed the stairs back to their rooms, Alina gripped Natalie's arm tightly. 3 days. What are we going to do in 3 days? Find out the truth, Natalie replied grimly. And if necessary, find a way out of this trap we have walked into. The next morning dawned hot and bright, the sun already punishing by the time Natalie descended for breakfast. She had slept poorly, her dreams filled with images of 3 ghostly brides fleeing into the desert night. Alina joined her at a small table, looking equally haggard. I cannot marry him, Alina said without preamble, keeping her voice low. Martin, I mean. I lay awake all night thinking about it, and I simply cannot do it. He is not a bad man, perhaps, but he is not stable. I would be condemned to a life of poverty while he chases fantasies underground. That is not what I agreed to. I know. Natalie stirred her coffee, watching the dark liquid swirl. Samuel is not who he pretended to be either, but what choice do we have? We have no money, no prospects, nowhere else to go. There has to be something. Alina's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Some kind of work we could do. We are educated, capable. Surely someone in this town needs a teacher or a seamstress or a cook. Before Natalie could respond, a shadow fell across their table. She looked up to find a man standing there, hat in hand, his expression apologetic for the interruption. Pardon me, ladies. I could not help but overhear, and I thought I might be able to help. He was tall, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His clothes were work-worn, the canvas trousers and cotton shirt of a working man, but clean and well-maintained. Most striking were his eyes, a warm brown that held intelligence and something else, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his weathered appearance. Natalie guessed he was perhaps 28 or 30, young enough to still have the ease of movement that hard labor had not yet stolen, but old enough to have the confidence of a man who knew his own worth. I am Jackson Pierce, he continued when neither woman immediately responded. I run a ranch about 5 miles south of town. I am in need of a housekeeper, someone to cook and manage the household while I focus on the livestock. The pay is fair, and there is a separate cabin on the property that would provide comfortable accommodations. Natalie studied him carefully, looking for the catch. In her experience, men did not offer help without expecting something in return. Why would you approach 2 strangers with such an offer, Mr. Pierce? Because I was sitting right over there, he nodded toward a corner table, and I heard enough to understand you are in a difficult position. I also happen to know Samuel Peterson's reputation, and I would not wish his company on anyone for longer than strictly necessary. As for why I need a housekeeper, I have been managing on my own since my mother passed last year, and I am making a mess of things. The house is in sorry shape, my meals are pathetic, and I am spending more time on chores than on the work that actually keeps the ranch running. Just one position. Alina asked quietly. You said housekeeper, singular. Jackson hesitated. I can only afford to employ one person at present, but I know for a fact that the school teacher, Miss Winters, has been looking for an assistant. The town has been growing and she has more students than she can manage alone. The pay would not be much, but it would include room and board in the teacher's quarters. Hope flickered in Natalie's chest, fragile and dangerous. Why are you helping us? Because I know what it is like to be trapped by circumstances beyond your control, Jackson said simply. And because those 2 men who met you at the stage yesterday are not good people. Samuel Peterson is a bully who wants a servant he can call a wife. Martin Hayes is a gambler and a drunk who would spend any money you earn chasing the next big strike. You deserve better than that. Alina reached across the table and gripped Natalie's hand. This could be our answer. Or it could be another trap, Natalie cautioned, But even as she spoke, she found herself wanting to believe in the quiet sincerity in Jackson Pierce's eyes. "I understand your hesitation," Jackson said. "Tell you what, come out to the ranch this afternoon, both of you. See the place, meet my crew, talk to Miss Winters if you like. She comes out sometimes to borrow books from my mother's collection. I can send someone into town to fetch her. Then you can make an informed decision. If you do not feel comfortable, I will bring you back to town, no questions asked. But at least you will have seen all your options before you commit to anything." It was a risk. But staying in Panamint, marrying Samuel Peterson or Martin Hayes, that was a different kind of risk, one that terrified Natalie far more than trusting this stranger with the kind eyes. "This afternoon," she agreed, "we will need to inform Samuel and Martin that we are exploring the town." "I will handle that," Jackson said. "I am not afraid of Samuel Peterson." He was true to his word. When Samuel appeared an hour later, intending to escort Natalie on a tour of his store, Jackson was there to politely but firmly inform him that the ladies had other plans for the day. Samuel's face flushed with anger, but he seemed reluctant to challenge Jackson directly. There was something in the cowboy's steady gaze, a quiet strength that suggested he was not a man to be pushed around. Martin made a brief, half-hearted protest, but he was already distracted by talk of a new shaft being sunk at the Confidence mine, and he hurried off with barely a backward glance at Alina. Jackson had a wagon waiting, sturdy and well-maintained, pulled by 2 patient horses. He helped both women up onto the seat, then climbed up himself, taking the reins with practiced ease. The ride out of town took them south along a dusty road that wound through the harsh desert landscape. The Panamint Mountains rose on either side, their peaks jagged against the impossibly blue sky. Natalie had never seen country like this. In Boston, green was everywhere, softening the edges of the world. Here, everything was exposed, raw, beautiful in a way that was almost frightening in its intensity. Jackson did not push conversation, seeming content to let the women absorb their surroundings. But after a mile or so, he began pointing out landmarks. The dry wash that sometimes flooded during the rare storms. The old prospector's shack where he had once found a rattlesnake coiled in the doorway. The distinctive rock formation that marked the boundary of his property. "How did you come to own a ranch here?" Natalie asked, genuinely curious. "My father came out in the gold rush," Jackson explained. "He did not find much gold, but he recognized good grazing land when he saw it. Started with a few head of cattle, built it up over the years. I was born here, learned everything from him. When he died, the ranch passed to me and my mother. Now it is just me." "That must be lonely," Alina observed. Jackson's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "I have the hands. Good men, most of them. They bunk in the main cabin during the week, head into town on Sundays. It is not so lonely as all that, just messy, and I am tired of eating my own cooking." The ranch, when it came into view, was more impressive than Natalie had expected. The main house was a long, low adobe structure with a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. It had been built to withstand the desert climate, designed for coolness and shade. Behind it stood a barn, corrals, and several smaller outbuildings. Everything was well maintained, the mark of a man who took pride in his property. 3 men emerged from the barn as the wagon approached. They were weathered, sun-darkened, eyeing the newcomers with curiosity but no hostility. "Ladies, these are my ranch hands, Charlie, Tom, and Raphael. Men, this is Miss Crawford and Miss Hayes. They might be staying on to help manage the household." The introductions were cordial. The men seemed genuinely pleased at the prospect of better meals and a cleaner living space. Tom, the oldest, admitted frankly that they had been surviving mainly on beans and coffee, with the occasional rabbit when someone had time to hunt. Jackson showed them the house, and Natalie felt her heart sink. He had not been exaggerating about the mess. Dust covered every surface. Dishes were piled in the basin. The floors needed sweeping. But underneath the neglect, she could see the bones of a lovely home. The furniture was well made, clearly built by someone who knew their craft. The windows were large, letting in abundant light. Her mother's books lined shelves in the main room, a collection that suggested education and culture. "The cabin I mentioned is just over there," Jackson said, pointing through the window at a smaller structure about 50 yards from the main house. "It is not large, but it is private and comfortable. My mother used it as a studio. She liked to paint." He said it with a touch of sadness that made Natalie look at him more closely. There was grief there, still fresh enough to hurt. She passed recently, last winter. Pneumonia. Jackson turned away from the window. "I am not telling you this to gain sympathy. I just want you to understand that I am offering honest work for honest pay. I need help, and you need a situation that does not involve marrying men who misrepresented themselves. It seems like a fair exchange." Eleanor was already moving through the house, her practical nature assessing the work that would be needed. "This is manageable," she said. "The structure is sound. The damage is all surface level. A few days of hard work would make a significant difference." "About the teaching position," Natalie interjected. "You mentioned Miss Winters needed an assistant." "I did. Let me ride into town and see if she is available to come out this afternoon. You can talk to her directly, see if it would be a good fit." Jackson glanced between them. "Unless you would both prefer to stay here. I suppose I could find enough work for 2 people if it came to that." Natalie and Eleanor exchanged glances. They had relied on each other through the long journey west, had become friends in the face of their shared predicament. The thought of separating was painful, but they were also practical women who understood that opportunities were rare and should not be wasted. "Let us talk to Miss Winters first," Natalie suggested. "Then we can decide together what makes the most sense." Jackson nodded and headed back out to saddle a horse. Within minutes, he was riding north toward town, moving with the easy confidence of a man who had spent his life in the saddle. Alone in the house, the 2 women looked at each other. "What do you think?" Eleanor asked. "Can we trust him?" "I am not sure," Natalie admitted, "but I am inclined to try. He seems honest, and this place, even in its current state, feels more like a home than anything Samuel Peterson could offer." They spent the next hour exploring the house and grounds more thoroughly. The kitchen was actually well equipped, with a good stove and ample storage. The bedrooms were spacious, the linens clean even if they were poorly folded and haphazardly stored. Jackson's mother had clearly been a woman of taste and refinement. Natalie found herself drawn to the books, running her fingers along the spines. Poetry, philosophy, novels both popular and obscure. It was the collection of someone who read deeply and widely. In the smaller cabin, they found the painting studio Jackson had mentioned. Canvases were stacked against the walls, covered with dusty cloths. Eleanor pulled one back to reveal a stunning landscape, the desert rendered in bold strokes of color that somehow captured both its harshness and its beauty. "She was talented," Eleanor breathed. "She was." Natalie felt a pang of sadness for the woman she would never meet, and for the son she had left behind. Jackson returned in the late afternoon with Miss Winters, a woman of perhaps 40 with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She greeted Natalie and Eleanor briskly, then got straight to the point. "Mr. Pierce tells me you might be interested in a teaching position. What are your qualifications?" Natalie had been a governess for 2 years before her father's business collapsed, teaching the children of a wealthy merchant family. She explained her experience, her education, her love of literature and history. Miss Winters listened intently, occasionally interjecting with questions. "The pay is $30 a month plus room and board," Miss Winters finally said. "The work is demanding. The children range in age from 5 to 15 with varying levels of preparation. Some are sharp as tacks, others have barely been taught to read. You would be responsible for the younger students primarily, teaching basic literacy and arithmetic. I would handle the older ones. Are you interested?" $30 a month was not a fortune, but it was independence. It was the ability to stand on her own feet, to build a life on her own terms rather than as an appendage to a husband she did not love. "Yes," Natalie said, "I am very interested." Miss Winters allowed herself a small smile. "Good. You can start Monday. Come by the schoolhouse tomorrow, and I will show you the materials and introduce you to the curriculum. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to get back to town before dark." After she left, Jackson turned to Alina. "So that leaves the question of you, Miss Hayes. Are you willing to take on this disaster of a household?" Alina looked around the room at the dust and disarray, and then back at Jackson's hopeful face. "I have one condition." "Name it." "You and your men have to help with the heavy work. I will cook, clean, manage the household. But I am not scrubbing all those floors by myself, and I am not hauling water for laundry without assistance. If you want a housekeeper, you need to give her the support to do the job properly." Jackson's grin was sudden and transforming, lighting up his whole face. "Deal. The men will be thrilled. Well, they might grumble about the extra work, but they will be happy enough when they are eating decent food again." It was settled then. Natalie would return to town with Jackson to collect their belongings and inform Samuel and Martin of their decision. Alina would stay at the ranch, beginning the process of setting the house to rights. The ride back to Panamint felt different. The desert did not seem quite as harsh, the mountains not quite as forbidding. Natalie found herself watching Jackson as he drove, noticing details she had missed before. The capable hands on the reins, the way he scanned the horizon constantly, alert to his surroundings, the lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for giving us a choice." Jackson glanced at her, his expression serious. Everyone deserves a choice, especially in something as important as how they live their lives. Not everyone sees it that way. "No," he agreed, "but that does not make it any less true." The confrontation with Samuel Peterson was every bit as unpleasant as Natalie had anticipated. He was waiting in the hotel lobby when they arrived, his face already flushed with anger. "What is the meaning of this, Miss Crawford? I have been waiting for you all day." "I apologize for the inconvenience," Natalie said, keeping her voice level. "But I have decided not to proceed with our arrangement. I will be taking a position as a teacher's assistant instead." Samuel's eyes narrowed. "You cannot do that. We had an agreement." "We had correspondence," Natalie corrected. "Correspondence in which you significantly misrepresented both your circumstances and your expectations. I do not consider that binding." "I paid for your passage west. Send me a bill for the expenses, and I will repay you when I am able," Natalie said. She was aware of Jackson standing behind her, a quiet, solid presence that gave her courage. "But I am not for sale, Mr. Peterson. Not for the price of a stagecoach ticket, and not for any price." Samuel took a step forward, his hand reaching out as if to grab her arm. He never made contact. Jackson moved with surprising speed, positioning himself between Natalie and the angry shopkeeper. "The lady has made her position clear," Jackson said, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel underlying it. "I suggest you accept that with grace. This is your doing." Samuel's attention shifted to Jackson. "You have been poisoning her mind against me. You had no right to interfere." I had every right to offer employment to someone looking for work, Jackson replied, and Miss Crawford had every right to accept. Now we are going to collect her belongings and leave. You can either step aside or you can make this ugly. The choice is yours. For a moment, it seemed Samuel might choose violence. His fists clenched, his face darkening further. But something in Jackson's steady gaze made him reconsider. He stepped back, though his expression was venomous. "You will regret this," he hissed at Natalie. "Both of you." "I doubt that," Jackson said mildly. "Come on, Miss Crawford, let us get your things." Martin Hayes was nowhere to be found, which Alina later admitted was almost a relief. She had been dreading a confrontation, and his absence meant they could simply leave a note explaining her decision. It was cowardly, perhaps, but it was also practical. By the time the sun was setting, both women were settled at the ranch. Alina in the main house, already making lists of supplies she would need. Natalie in the small cabin, unpacking her trunks and trying to absorb the fact that her life had changed so dramatically in the span of a single day. She walked to the window and looked out at the desert twilight. The mountains were silhouettes against a sky that burned with orange and purple and deep crimson. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. This was her home now. This harsh, wild country. This small cabin. This unexpected refuge. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Jackson standing there with a lantern in one hand and a plate of food in the other. "Alina insisted I bring this," he said. "She has already started work in the kitchen and she says you need to eat." The plate held fresh bread, cold beef, and cheese. Simple fare, but Natalie's stomach reminded her that she had barely eaten all day. "Thank you. And please thank Alina for me." Jackson nodded, but he did not immediately leave. He seemed to be struggling with something, the words not coming easily. "I want you to know," he finally said, "that you are safe here, both of you. I know you have no reason to trust me, and I know the circumstances of your arrival were difficult. But I give you my word that you are under my protection. No one will harm you while you are on this ranch." The sincerity in his voice made Natalie's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Why are you doing this? Really? You could have hired any number of people from town." Jackson was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting out toward the darkening landscape. "My mother came west as a mail-order bride," he said quietly. "Not to my father, to someone else, a man who turned out to be violent and cruel. She ran away after 3 months with nothing but the clothes on her back. She was stranded in Sacramento with no money and no prospects. My father found her trying to earn enough for a meal by selling sketches on the street. He offered her honest work, and eventually they fell in love. But she never forgot what it was like to be trapped, dependent on the mercy of men who saw her as property rather than a person. She would have wanted me to help you if I could." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes. "She raised a good son." Jackson's smile was sad. "I hope so. She deserved that much. Anyway, I will let you rest. If you need anything, just holler. Someone is always around." After he left, Natalie ate her meal slowly, savoring each bite. The bread was still warm, clearly freshly baked. Alina had wasted no time making her presence felt. Through the window, Natalie could see lights in the main house, hear the distant sounds of conversation and laughter. The ranch hands were gathered for their evening meal, and the atmosphere seemed almost festive. She cleaned her plate, washed her face in the basin, and changed into her nightgown. The bed was simple but comfortable, the quilts worn soft with age. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the desert night, Natalie felt something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. Fragile and tentative, but real. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Natalie rose early, dressed in one of her simpler day dresses, and made her way to the main house. The transformation was already remarkable. Alina must have worked late into the night. The floors had been swept, the windows opened to let in fresh air. The kitchen smelled of coffee and bacon, and the ranch hands were gathered around the table with expressions of profound contentment. "Miss Crawford." Tom greeted her with a gap-toothed grin. "Miss Hayes is an angel sent from heaven. Have you tasted her biscuits?" "Not yet," Natalie admitted, accepting the plate Alina pressed into her hands. The biscuits were, in fact, exceptional. Light and fluffy with a perfect golden crust. The bacon was crisp, the eggs cooked just right. It was the best meal Natalie had eaten since leaving Boston. Jackson appeared from outside, his hair still damp from washing at the pump. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene with obvious pleasure. "I am beginning to think I made the best business decision of my life," he said, accepting his own plate from Alina. "Flattery will not get you out of helping me move that heavy cupboard this afternoon," Alina replied, but she was smiling. After breakfast, Jackson hitched up the wagon to take Natalie into town for her meeting with Miss Winters. The ride was pleasant, the morning still relatively cool. They talked about inconsequential things: the weather, the ranch, the various characters who populated Panamint. Jackson had a dry sense of humor that surprised Natalie. He could tell a story well, painting vivid pictures with his words. Miss Winters was waiting at the schoolhouse, a small building on the edge of town that had clearly started life as something else. A mining office, perhaps, or a storage shed. Inside, it had been transformed into a surprisingly cheerful space. Desks were arranged in neat rows. A chalkboard dominated one wall. Books were stacked on shelves and children's drawings decorated the walls. "This is what we are working with," Miss Winters said, gesturing around. "As you can see, resources are limited. Most of the children come from mining families. Their parents work long hours, and education is not always their first priority. Your job will be to convince them that learning matters, that it can open doors. That is not always easy in a place like this." Natalie spent the next 2 hours reviewing curriculum, examining textbooks, and discussing teaching methods with Miss Winters. The older woman was exacting but fair, clearly passionate about her work. By the time they finished, Natalie felt simultaneously energized and daunted. This would be real work, challenging and demanding, but it would also be meaningful. Jackson was waiting outside, sitting on the wagon seat with his hat tipped back against the sun. He straightened when Natalie emerged. "How did it go?" "Well, I think I start Monday." She climbed up beside him, suddenly aware of his presence in a way she had not been before, the strength in his hands as he helped her up, the way his shirt pulled across his shoulders, the line of his jaw beneath the shadow of his hat. She looked away quickly, unsettled by her own thoughts. Jackson Pierce was her employer in a sense. Or at least, he was Alina's employer, and he had helped facilitate Natalie's position with Miss Winters. Any thoughts beyond that were inappropriate and foolish. But as they rode back to the ranch, she found her gaze drifting to him again and again. The way he handled the reins with easy competence. The way he scanned the horizon, always alert. There was something compelling about him, something that had nothing to do with his appearance and everything to do with the quiet strength he carried so naturally. The days that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Natalie spent her time preparing for her teaching position, reviewing materials and planning lessons. Alina threw herself into managing the household with impressive efficiency. The ranch hands, initially skeptical about having women on the property, quickly became devoted supporters. Raphael, who had some skill with carpentry, helped Alina repair damaged furniture. Tom appointed himself her assistant in the garden she was planning. Charlie, the quietest of the three, began leaving small gifts. wildflowers in a jar, a smooth stone he thought was pretty, a carved wooden bird. Jackson was a constant presence, working from dawn until dark alongside his men. But he always made time in the evenings to check on both women, making sure they had everything they needed. He brought Natalie books from his mother's collection, somehow sensing which ones she would enjoy. He helped Alina move furniture and hang curtains. He listened when they talked, really listened, engaging with their ideas and opinions in a way that suggested he valued their thoughts. Natalie found herself looking forward to those evening conversations more than she wanted to admit. They would sit on the porch after supper, watching the sun set over the mountains, and talk about everything and nothing. Jackson was surprisingly well-read, his education cobbled together from his mother's library and his own insatiable curiosity. He could discuss poetry and philosophy as easily as cattle prices and water rights. "You should have been a teacher yourself," Natalie told him one evening. "You have the mind for it." Jackson shook his head. "I am a rancher. It is all I have ever wanted to be, but I respect learning." My mother made sure of that. She used to say that a man who refuses to educate himself is a man who chooses to stay small. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. Jackson's expression was distant, touched with sadness. She never quite fit here, too refined, too educated. But she loved my father and she loved this land. She made peace with it in her own way. Her painting helped. She would spend hours out there, capturing the desert on canvas. I think it was her way of trying to understand this place, to find beauty in what others saw as desolation. "I think I understand that," Natalie said softly. Boston was comfortable, familiar, but it was also suffocating. There were so many rules, so many expectations. Here everything is exposed, harsh, yes, but also honest. There is something freeing about that. Jackson turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "You are settling in well, then. Better than I expected." Natalie forced herself to look away, to focus on the mountains rather than the man beside her. "I was so afraid when I arrived. Everything seemed like a mistake. But now I think perhaps it was fate. A strange kind of fate, but fate nonetheless." "Fate knows better than letters do," Jackson said quietly. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Natalie felt her heart begin to race. This was dangerous territory. She had sworn she would focus on her independence, on building a life that belonged to her alone. She could not afford to lose herself in feelings for a man, no matter how kind or compelling he might be. But when she finally looked back at Jackson, when their eyes met in the fading light, she knew it was already too late. Something had shifted between them, something neither of them had planned or invited. It was simply there, undeniable as the mountains rising against the sky. "I should go," Natalie said, her voice unsteady. "I have lesson plans to finish." Jackson nodded, but his expression suggested he understood exactly what she was running from. "Good night, Miss Crawford. Good night, Mr. Pierce." She fled to the safety of her cabin, closing the door behind her with trembling hands. This was foolish. She barely knew him. She was supposed to be starting a new life, independent and free. She could not throw that away for feelings that might be nothing more than gratitude and proximity. But even as she tried to convince herself, she knew the truth. What she felt for Jackson Pierce was real. It was growing stronger every day. And sooner or later she would have to decide what to do about it. Alina noticed, of course. A few days later, as they sat together mending curtains for the main house, she looked up from her sewing with a knowing expression. "You care for him." It was not a question. Natalie felt her cheeks flush. "I do not know what you mean. Please, I have eyes." "The way you look at him when you think no one is watching. The way he looks at you. It is obvious to everyone except possibly the two of you." Natalie set down her needle. It does not matter. I came here to be independent, not to fall in love. Why can you not do both? Alina asked reasonably. Jackson is a good man. He respects you. He values your intelligence. If you have feelings for him, why not explore them? Because I am afraid, Natalie admitted. What if I am wrong about him? What if this is just gratitude or loneliness? What if I give up everything I have worked for and it turns out to be a mistake? Alina reached across and took her hand. What if it is not a mistake? What if it is the best thing that could happen to you? You cannot live your whole life afraid of being hurt, Natalie. Sometimes you have to take a risk. Is that what you are doing with Charlie? Alina blushed, confirming what Natalie had suspected. The quiet ranch hand had been paying increasingly obvious attention to Alina, and she had not seemed to mind. Maybe, Alina admitted. He is kind. He makes me laugh. He is not particularly sophisticated or educated, but he has a good heart. And after everything with Martin Hayes, after all those lies and false promises, there is something refreshing about someone so honest and straightforward. Does Jackson know? I think so. He has not said anything, but he seems pleased. Charlie is one of his best men. I do not think he would object to us courting as long as the work still gets done. Natalie squeezed her friend's hand. Then I am happy for you, truly. And I want the same for you, Alina said firmly. Stop running from what you feel. Talk to him. See what happens. The worst that can occur is that you discover the feelings are not mutual, but I do not think that is the case. Monday arrived, bringing with it Natalie's first day of teaching. She dressed carefully in a modest blue dress, pinning her hair up in a severe bun that she hoped made her look appropriately professional. Jackson drove her into town, and this time the ride was quiet. Natalie was nervous, rehearsing lessons in her mind. Jackson seemed to sense her mood and did not push conversation. You will do well, he said as they arrived at the schoolhouse. Those children are lucky to have you. His confidence steadied her. Thank you. I hope I can live up to your faith. You will. The day was challenging but rewarding. The children were curious, energetic, and in some cases, remarkably undisciplined. But they were also hungry for attention, for kindness, for the sense that someone cared about their futures. By the time the final bell rang, Natalie was exhausted but exhilarated. This was work that mattered. She could already see the difference she might make. Miss Winters was pleased with her performance. You have a gift for this, she said. The younger children responded to you immediately. That is not something that can be taught. Either you have it or you do not. The words glowed warm in Natalie's chest as Jackson drove her back to the ranch. She told him about the day, about the children, about the small victories and frustrations. He listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions, laughing at her descriptions of the more memorable students. There is a boy named Timothy who spent half the morning trying to convince me that his father had discovered a silver vein the size of a house, Natalie said. When I gently suggested that might be an exaggeration, he looked at me with complete seriousness and said his father never lies. I did not have the heart to tell him that his father is probably the biggest storyteller in Panamint. Jackson grinned. That would be Timothy Dawson. His father has been on the verge of striking it rich for 15 years, never quite manages it, but his optimism is unshakable. They were still laughing when they arrived back at the ranch to find chaos. One of the horses had gotten loose and injured its leg in a gopher hole. Raphael and Tom were trying to calm the frightened animal while Charlie ran for supplies. Jackson was out of the wagon instantly, assessing the situation with quick efficiency. Tom, hold his head. Raphael, I need you to keep his weight off that leg. Charlie, where is that rope? Natalie stood back, watching as Jackson worked. His hands were gentle but firm on the horse, his voice low and soothing. He examined the leg carefully, his expression grave. "It is not broken," he finally announced, "but it is badly strained. He will need rest and careful tending. Tom, can you fashion a support?" "I will get right on it, boss." The crisis managed, Jackson finally turned back to Natalie. His shirt was dusty, his hair disheveled. There was a smudge of dirt on his cheek. He looked tired and worried, and Natalie felt her heart turn over. Without thinking, she reached up and brushed the dirt from his face. Jackson went very still, his eyes fixed on hers. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You are welcome." They stood there in the fading light, close enough to touch, the air between them charged with everything they had not said. Natalie's hand was still raised, her fingers tingling from even that brief contact. Jackson's gaze dropped to her mouth, and for one breathless moment she thought he might kiss her. Then a leaner called from the house, something about supper being ready, and the spell broke. Jackson stepped back, clearing his throat. "We should go in." "Yes," Natalie agreed, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "We should." Supper was a lively affair. The men were in good spirits despite the incident with the horse, teasing each other and telling stories. Eleanor had outdone herself with a roast chicken and vegetables, and everyone ate with enthusiasm. But Natalie barely tasted her food. She was too aware of Jackson sitting across from her, of the way his eyes kept seeking hers across the table. After the meal, after the dishes were cleared and the men had retired to the bunkhouse, Eleanor caught Natalie's arm. "He is on the porch," she whispered. "Go talk to him. No more running away." Natalie's heart hammered, but she forced herself to walk outside. Jackson was standing at the railing, looking out at the night. The moon was rising, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. "Cannot sleep?" she asked softly. He turned, and even in the dim light she could see the tension in his posture. "No, too much on my mind. The horse." Among other things. Jackson was quiet for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "Natalie, I need to be honest with you about something." Her breath caught. "What is it?" "When I offered you and Eleanor positions here, it was because I genuinely needed help. That was the truth." But it was not the whole truth. He turned to face her fully. "From the moment I saw you in that hotel dining room, I was drawn to you. Your intelligence, your courage, the way you refused to let Samuel Peterson intimidate you. I told myself I was just helping someone in need. But these past few weeks, working alongside you, talking to you every evening, I have realized I was lying to myself." Natalie could barely breathe. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I have feelings for you," Jackson said simply. "Real feelings, not just gratitude or friendship. I think about you constantly. I look forward to seeing you every day. When you are not here, the ranch feels empty, and I know I have no right to say any of this. You came here to build an independent life, and you deserve that. The last thing you need is another man trying to stake a claim on your future. But I could not keep silent any longer. You deserve to know the truth." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes. "You foolish man," she said, her voice breaking. "Do you really think you are the only one who has been struggling with this? I have been fighting these feelings since almost the first day. Telling myself it was too soon, that I barely knew you, that I was supposed to be focused on my independence. But it did not matter. The feelings kept growing anyway." Jackson closed the distance between them in 2 strides. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying that I care for you," Natalie said, her voice trembling. "More than I should, more than is probably wise. I am saying that when I imagine my future now, you are in it. And that terrifies me, but it also feels more right than anything has felt in a very long time." Jackson's hands came up to cup her face, his touch infinitely gentle. "I will never try to control you or limit you. You are not property to be owned. You are a brilliant, capable woman, and I would count myself the luckiest man alive if you would consider building a future with me. Not as my subordinate, but as my equal, my partner." "Yes," Natalie breathed. "Yes, I want that. I want you." When Jackson kissed her, it was like coming home. His lips were warm and gentle, asking rather than demanding. Natalie's hands came up to rest against his chest, feeling the solid beat of his heart beneath her palms. The kiss deepened, and she felt herself melting into him, letting go of all the fear and doubt that had held her back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "Fate knows better than letters do," he murmured. Natalie laughed, the sound bright and joyous. "Indeed it does." They stood there on the porch for a long time, holding each other under the vast desert sky. Inside the house, Natalie could hear Alina singing softly as she finished cleaning the kitchen. In the distance, a coyote called, the sound wild and lonely, but she did not feel lonely. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt completely at peace. The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness. Natalie and Jackson courted properly, taking time to truly know each other even as their feelings deepened. He took her riding through the desert, showing her hidden springs and ancient petroglyphs carved into rock faces. She read to him in the evenings from his mother's collection of books, and they discussed literature and philosophy late into the night. Alina and Charlie were also growing closer, though their courtship was quieter, less dramatic. Charlie was a man of few words, but his devotion was obvious in every small gesture. The way he always made sure Alina had the best cut of meat at supper. The way he repaired things around the house before she even had to ask. The wildflowers he left on the kitchen windowsill every morning. "We are a pair, are we not?" Alina said to Natalie one afternoon as they worked in the garden together. "We came here as mail-order brides for men we never wanted and ended up finding love anyway." "The right love," Natalie agreed. "Not the love someone else chose for us, but the love we chose for ourselves." In town, their situation caused considerable gossip. Samuel Peterson was especially bitter, spreading rumors about Jackson Pierce stealing his bride and corrupting decent women. Most people ignored him. Jackson was respected in Panamint, known as a fair and honest man, and Natalie's work at the schoolhouse was already making a positive impression. The children adored her, and their parents appreciated the attention she gave to their education. But not everyone was pleased. One afternoon, as Natalie was locking up the schoolhouse after a long day, Samuel appeared. His expression was ugly, his breath reeking of whiskey. "You think you are so much better than me," he said, his words slightly slurred. "Coming here with your fancy education and your high-minded principles. But I know what you really are. You are just a woman who could not find a decent man back east, so you came out here to trick some poor cowboy into marriage." Natalie's hand tightened on her bag, but she kept her voice level. "You need to leave, Mr. Peterson. You are drunk." "I paid good money for you," Samuel continued, moving closer. You owe me what I was promised." Fear spiked through Natalie, cold and sharp. They were alone on this side of town, the schoolhouse isolated from the main street. She took a step back, looking for an escape route. "I owe you nothing," she said firmly. "Now step aside or I will scream." Samuel laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Go ahead. No one will hear you, and even if they did, who do you think they would believe? A respected businessman or some uppity mail-order bride?" He reached for her, and Natalie did scream. She also swung her bag with all her strength, catching Samuel in the side of the head. He staggered, more from surprise than pain, and that was when Jackson appeared. He must have been coming to pick her up, as he often did. He took in the situation at a glance. his expression going cold and hard in a way Natalie had never seen before. In 2 strides, he had Samuel by the collar, slamming him back against the wall of the schoolhouse. "If you ever," Jackson said, his voice deadly quiet, "come near her again, if you so much as look at her wrong, I will make sure you regret it. Do you understand me?" Samuel tried to bluster, to protest, but the look in Jackson's eyes silenced him. He nodded frantically, and Jackson released him with a shove that sent him sprawling in the dust. "Get out of here, now." Samuel scrambled to his feet and fled, not looking back. Jackson turned to Natalie, his expression transforming instantly from rage to concern. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" Natalie shook her head, though she was trembling. "I am fine, just frightened." Jackson pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I am so sorry. I should have been here sooner. I should have anticipated that he might try something. You could not have known." Natalie pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him. Leather and soap and something indefinably his own. "But I am very glad you came when you did." They rode back to the ranch in silence, Jackson's arm around her waist, holding her close. By the time they arrived, Natalie had stopped shaking, but she still felt unsettled. The incident had reminded her how vulnerable she was, how quickly her new life could be threatened. That evening, Jackson made a decision. He called Alina and the ranch hands together in the main room of the house, his expression serious. "What happened today cannot happen again," he said. "Natalie was threatened by Samuel Peterson. He did not hurt her, but he could have. We were lucky I arrived when I did. That kind of luck cannot be counted on." "What are you saying, boss?" Tom asked. "I am saying that I want to marry Natalie if she will have me, and I want to do it soon, not just because I love her, but because a wife has legal protections that an employee does not. If she is my wife, Peterson or anyone else will think twice before trying to harm her." Natalie's heart was pounding. This was not how she had imagined a proposal. There were no roses, no romantic speeches, just hard practicality in the face of real danger. But looking at Jackson, at the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, she realized it was perfect in its own way. This was who he was, a man who faced problems head-on, who protected those he cared about. "Yes," she said simply. Jackson turned to her, surprise and hope warring on his face. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you. And not just for protection, though I appreciate the practical considerations. I will marry you because I love you, because I cannot imagine my life without you in it, because you make me happier than I ever thought possible." The room erupted in cheers. Alina was crying and laughing at the same time. The ranch hands were clapping Jackson on the back, offering ribald congratulations. Charlie cleared his throat and announced that if there was going to be one wedding, there might as well be 2. And would Alina Hayes do him the honor of becoming his wife? Alina said yes through her tears, and the celebration grew even louder. Someone produced a bottle of whiskey that had been hidden away for a special occasion. Toasts were drunk. Plans were made. It was decided that both couples would marry in a week's time, long enough to make arrangements but short enough that Samuel Peterson would not have time to cause more trouble. The week that followed was a whirlwind. Miss Winters gave Natalie time off to prepare, hiring a temporary replacement. Alina threw herself into making her cabin suitable for a married couple, while Tom and Raphael worked on expanding the bunkhouse so that Charlie and Alina could have privacy in the main house. Natalie sewed a simple but elegant wedding dress from fabric Jackson insisted on buying, cream-colored silk that felt like water against her skin. The ceremony was held at the ranch on a Sunday afternoon. The ranch hands cleaned up until they were nearly unrecognizable, wearing their best clothes and slicking back their hair. Miss Winters came, as did several families from town whose children Natalie taught. Even the town preacher, a mild-mannered man named Reverend Williams, seemed pleased to officiate at both ceremonies. Natalie wore her cream silk dress with Alina's help, pinning wildflowers into her dark hair. Her hands trembled as Alina fastened the buttons up the back. "You are sure about this?" Alina asked softly. "It is not too late to change your mind." "I have never been more sure of anything," Natalie replied. She turned to face her friend. "What about you?" Alina smiled, radiant in her own simple blue dress. "Charlie is a good man. He may not be educated or sophisticated, but he is kind and honest and he loves me. That is enough. That is more than enough." They walked out together to where the men waited under an arbor that Tom had constructed, covered with whatever greenery could be coaxed from the harsh desert landscape. Jackson looked impossibly handsome in a new suit, his dark hair freshly cut, his eyes bright with emotion as they landed on Natalie. Beside him, Charlie stood equally proud, his gaze locked on Alina. The ceremony was simple but profound. Reverend Williams spoke about commitment and partnership, about the sacred bond being formed. When it came time for vows, Jackson's voice was steady and clear. "I promise to love you, respect you, and stand beside you all the days of my life. I promise to value your dreams as much as my own, to support your independence even as I offer my partnership. I promise to be faithful, to be honest, and to always make you laugh when you need it most." Natalie's voice trembled slightly as she made her own vows, but the words came from her heart. "I promise to love you with everything I am. I promise to be your partner in all things, to share your burdens and your joys. I promise to build a life with you that honors both of us, that allows us both to grow and thrive. I promise to always remember that we chose each other and to treasure that choice every day." When Jackson kissed her as his wife, Natalie felt complete in a way she had not known was possible. This was right. This was home. Not the ranch, not California, but this man who held her like she was precious beyond measure. Charlie and Alina's ceremony was equally touching, and by the time both couples were officially married, there was not a dry eye among the assembled guests. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night. There was food and music, laughter and dancing under the stars. At some point, Jackson pulled Natalie away from the crowd, leading her to a quiet spot behind the barn where they could see the mountains silhouetted against the night sky. "Hello, Mrs. Pierce," he said softly. Natalie smiled, loving the sound of her new name. "Hello, husband. I know this was not what you planned when you came west. You were supposed to be independent, building your own life on your own terms." "I am still independent," Natalie interrupted. "I still teach. I still have my own thoughts and dreams and ambitions. But now I also have a partner to share them with. That is not a loss of independence, Jackson. That is a gift." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Natalie felt desire kindle in her belly. She was a married woman now. Tonight she would share Jackson's bed for the first time. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. As if sensing her nervousness, Jackson pulled back, cradling her face in his hands. "We do not have to rush anything. We have all the time in the world." "I know," Natalie whispered. "But I want this. I want you." They slipped away from the celebration, walking hand in hand to the small cabin that was now their home. Inside, someone had lit candles, casting warm, flickering light across the room. The bed had been made up with fresh linens, and wildflowers sat in a jar on the small table. Alina's work, Natalie realized with a rush of affection for her friend. What followed was tender and sweet, fumbling at times as they learned each other's bodies, but full of love and laughter. Jackson was patient and gentle, making sure Natalie's pleasure matched his own. When it was over, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, skin against skin, hearts beating in tandem. "I love you," Jackson murmured against her hair. "I love you too," Natalie replied, her voice thick with emotion. "More than I ever thought possible." They fell asleep that way, wrapped around each other, and Natalie's last thought before sleep claimed her was that she had never been so happy. The months that followed were the happiest of Natalie's life. She continued teaching, finding profound satisfaction in watching her students grow and learn. Jackson's ranch prospered, the cattle bringing in enough profit to make meaningful improvements to the property. They built an addition onto the cabin, adding a second bedroom for the future they both hoped for. Alina and Charlie settled into married life with obvious contentment, their quiet devotion to each other a joy to witness. The seasons changed, summer giving way to the brief respite of autumn. Natalie discovered she was pregnant in early December, and the news brought tears of joy to Jackson's eyes. He became even more protective, insisting she reduce her teaching hours, making sure she rested and ate properly. Natalie tolerated his fussing with amused patience, secretly touched by his concern. Alina announced her own pregnancy a month later, and the two women spent hours planning for their children who would grow up together, who would be as close as siblings. The ranch hands were delighted, already arguing about who would teach the babies to ride and rope. Samuel Peterson had left Panamint shortly after the wedding, reportedly heading to San Francisco. No one mourned his departure. Martin Hayes was still in town, still chasing his elusive fortune underground, but he had found a widow who was willing to take a chance on him. Natalie saw them occasionally and was surprised to find that they seemed genuinely happy. Perhaps Martin had simply needed someone who understood the gambler's dreams that drove him. Spring came to the desert in a riot of unexpected color. Wildflowers bloomed across the landscape, painting the harsh terrain in shades of gold and purple and crimson. Natalie's pregnancy was progressing well, her body changing to accommodate the new life growing within her. She felt beautiful and powerful, radiantly healthy in a way that made Jackson look at her with undisguised wonder. "You are glowing," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "I am happy," Natalie replied simply. "I have work that matters, a home I love, and a husband who respects me as much as he loves me. What more could I possibly want?" The baby came in late June, born during a fierce desert storm that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. It was a boy, strong and healthy, with his father's dark hair and his mother's determined chin. They named him Thomas, after Jackson's father, and he was perfect. Alina gave birth 3 weeks later to a daughter with auburn hair and her mother's green eyes. They named her Sarah, and from the moment the two children met, it was clear they would be inseparable. The years that followed were not always easy. The ranch faced droughts and floods, cattle diseases and market fluctuations. Natalie continued teaching, eventually taking over as head teacher when Miss Winters retired. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Margaret and another son they called James. Alina and Charlie had 3 more, filling the ranch with noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of family. Through it all, Natalie and Jackson's love remained constant. They had been shaped by the harsh desert landscape, made strong by adversity, but also made tender by the knowledge that they had chosen each other against all odds. They had come together not because of careful arrangements or family expectations, but because fate, in its mysterious wisdom, had seen fit to bring 2 people together who needed each other in ways they had not even known. On their 10th anniversary, Jackson took Natalie back to the spot behind the barn where he had first kissed her as his wife. The ranch had grown and changed around them. The cabin was now a proper house, expanded and improved over the years. The barn had been rebuilt after a fire. New corrals stretched across the property, but this spot remained the same, a quiet sanctuary where they could still find each other. "You ever regret it?" Jackson asked, pulling her into his arms. "Giving up your independence, tying yourself to a cowboy and a ranch in the middle of nowhere?" Natalie laughed, the sound rich and full. "I did not give up my independence. I chose to share my life with someone who values it. There is a difference. And as for the middle of nowhere, this is not nowhere. This is home. This is where our children were born, where our love has grown deeper every year. This is exactly where I am meant to be." "Fate knows better than letters do," Jackson murmured, echoing the words he had spoken so long ago. "Yes," Natalie agreed, tilting her face up for his kiss. "Fate knows best." They stood there as the sun set over the Panamint Mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. In the distance, they could hear their children playing, their laughter carrying on the desert wind. Alina was singing in the kitchen, preparing supper for the gathered family. The ranch hands were finishing their work for the day, their voices a familiar counterpoint to the evening sounds. Natalie thought back to that desperate woman who had arrived on the stagecoach so many years ago, frightened and uncertain, convinced she had made a terrible mistake. She thought about the letters that had brought her west, letters full of lies and false promises. She thought about the moment when everything had seemed lost, when the future had looked bleak and hopeless. And then she thought about Jackson, stepping forward to offer her a choice. Not demanding anything, not making promises he could not keep, just offering honest work and a chance to decide her own fate. She thought about the way their friendship had grown into something deeper, something neither of them had expected but both had welcomed. She thought about the life they had built together, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. Two brides had arrived in Panamint for the wrong men, but in the end, they had found the right ones. Not through careful planning or well-crafted correspondence, but through courage and choice, and the mysterious workings of a fate that knew better than any letter could express what their hearts truly needed. As darkness fell over the desert, as the first stars began to appear in the vast sky, Natalie leaned into her husband's embrace and felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the courage that had brought her west. Gratitude for the mistake that had set her on a different path. Gratitude for the cowboy who had seen her not as property or a solution to his problems, but as a person worthy of respect and love. The desert was harsh and unforgiving, but it was also honest. It demanded strength, but it rewarded those who were willing to adapt and persevere. Natalie had found that strength within herself, and in doing so, she had found everything she had ever wanted, but had not known to ask for. As they walked back to the house together, hands intertwined, Natalie knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The letters that had brought her west had been false, but the love she had found was real. The promises made by Samuel Peterson had been empty, but the promises she and Jackson made to each other every day were solid as the mountains themselves. Their children came running to meet them. Thomas, now tall and gangly at 10 years old, Margaret with her father's smile, little James still toddling on unsteady legs. Alina and Charlie emerged from the house, their own children trailing behind them. The ranch hands gathered, and together they all sat down to supper, the long table groaning under the weight of Alina's cooking. It was a simple scene, domestic and ordinary. But to Natalie, it was everything. This was the life she had been meant for, the family she had been meant to find. Not in Boston, not through carefully arranged marriages and social expectations, but here in the wild desert of California, with a man who had offered her choice when she had none, who had given her love when she had expected only a transaction. Years continued to pass, each one adding its own joys and sorrows. There were more children, more celebrations, more challenges overcome together. The ranch grew and prospered, becoming known throughout the region for the quality of its cattle and the integrity of its owner. Natalie's school became a cornerstone of the community, educating generations of children who might otherwise have gone without. Alina and Charlie remained their closest friends and partners, the two families so intertwined that it was sometimes hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Their children grew up together, and eventually, young Thomas Pierce fell in love with Sarah Hayes, bringing the families even closer together. When Thomas asked for Sarah's hand in marriage, both sets of parents could not have been more delighted. The wedding was held at the ranch on a perfect spring day, and as Natalie watched her son marry the daughter of her dearest friend, she felt the circle of their lives closing in the most beautiful way possible. "We did well," Alina whispered, standing beside her as the ceremony concluded. "We did," Natalie agreed, tears streaming down her face. "We took a terrible situation and made something beautiful from it. Because we had the courage to choose," Alina said. "To really choose, not just accept what was given to us." "And because we had help," Natalie added, glancing at Jackson, who was standing with Charlie, both men looking immensely proud and slightly tearful. "Because someone was kind enough to offer us another option." As the celebration got underway, as music filled the air and dancers whirled across the packed earth, Natalie found herself back in Jackson's arms, moving to a waltz that she had taught him years ago. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noting her distant expression. "The stagecoach," Natalie replied. "That day Alina and I arrived in Panamint, how frightened we were, how certain I was that I had made a terrible mistake. If someone had told me then that I would spend the rest of my life here, that I would be this happy, I would never have believed them." Jackson pulled her closer. "I was sitting in that hotel dining room, trying to work up the courage to ask Miss Winters about the teaching position I knew she needed to fill. I was planning to suggest one of the women from church. And then I heard you and Alina talking, heard the fear in your voices, and I knew I had to do something. But I never imagined it would lead to this, to you, to us. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not overheard us, if you had not offered to help?" Jackson was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes, but not often, because I believe we would have found each other anyway. Maybe not that day, maybe not in that way, but somehow, somewhere we were meant to find each other. The letters brought you west for the wrong man, but they brought you to the right place at the right time. Fate knows better than letters do." Natalie rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she said simply. "I have loved you since almost the beginning, and I will love you until the end." "And I love you," Jackson replied, "more than I have words to express. You are my partner, my best friend, the love of my life. You are everything I ever wanted and everything I never knew I needed." They danced until the stars filled the sky, until the younger couples took over the floor and the older generation retired to the sidelines. They sat with Alina and Charlie, with their children and grandchildren gathering around them, and Natalie felt a peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. This was what happiness looked like. Not perfection, not the absence of challenges, but love that had been tested and proven true. It was the laughter of children and the quiet companionship of decades. It was work that mattered and a home that sheltered. It was the knowledge that she had been brave enough to choose her own path, even when that path had looked uncertain and frightening. Two brides had arrived for the wrong men, but they had found the right ones. And in doing so, they had discovered that love is not something that can be arranged or guaranteed through correspondence. Real love is built day by day, choice by choice, in moments both grand and small. It is found in the courage to say no to what is wrong and yes to what is right, even when the right path is unclear. As the night deepened and the celebration began to wind down, as families gathered their sleepy children and headed home or to guest rooms, Natalie and Jackson remained on the porch, unwilling to let go of the magic of the evening. "Tell me something," Natalie said softly. "Something I do not know about you." Jackson thought for a moment. "When I first saw you, before I even spoke to you, I felt like I had been hit by lightning. I told myself it was just attraction, that it did not mean anything. But somewhere deep down, I knew. I knew you were going to change my life." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes. "I wish I could say I felt the same, but I was too frightened, too overwhelmed. It was not until later, until I saw you with the injured horse, that I started to understand what you were to me, what you could be to me. The important thing is that we both got there eventually," Jackson said. "We both chose each other, fully and freely. Everything else is just details." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the moon rise over the mountains. Inside the house, Natalie could hear the murmur of voices as Alina and Charlie prepared for bed, the familiar sounds of family settling in for the night. Their grandchildren were sleeping in various rooms, claimed by exhaustion after the excitement of the wedding. This was her legacy, Natalie realized. Not just the children she had taught or the work she had done, but this family she had helped build. These relationships, these bonds of love and loyalty that would extend forward into generations she would never meet. She and Alina had taken the broken pieces of their old lives and crafted something new, something beautiful and lasting. The desert night was cool, the air finally releasing the heat it had held all day. A coyote called in the distance, and somewhere an owl hooted. The sounds that had once seemed strange and frightening were now as familiar as her own heartbeat. "Come to bed," Jackson said softly, standing and offering his hand. "It has been a long day." Natalie took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. They walked together into the house, into the bedroom they had shared for so many years. The bed was the same one they had slept in on their wedding night, though they had replaced the mattress several times over the decades. Natalie still remembered that first night, the nervousness and excitement, the gentle way Jackson had made her feel safe and cherished. As they prepared for bed, moving through the routines that had become second nature over the years, Natalie caught sight of herself in the mirror. She was no longer the frightened young woman who had arrived in Panamint so long ago. Her face bore the marks of time, lines around her eyes and mouth, silver threading through her dark hair. But her eyes were bright, filled with the confidence and contentment that came from a life well lived. "What are you thinking?" Jackson asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "That I am glad I got lost," Natalie replied. "That I am glad the letters brought me to the wrong man because it led me to the right one. That I would not change a single thing about how we found each other." Jackson kissed her temple. "Neither would I. Every moment, every choice, every twist of fate led us here. To this life we have built together. I would not trade it for anything." They climbed into bed, and Natalie settled into her usual spot, her head on Jackson's shoulder, his arm around her. This was home. Not the house or the ranch or even California itself, but this moment, this man, this love that had sustained them through everything. As sleep began to claim her, Natalie's thoughts drifted back one last time to that sweltering August day when she had arrived in Panamint. Two frightened women, stepping off a stagecoach into an uncertain future. They had been destined for the wrong men, for marriages that would have been disasters. But fate, in its infinite wisdom, had other plans. A cowboy with kind eyes and a generous heart had stepped forward and changed everything. He had not promised them riches or easy lives. He had simply offered them choice, the most precious gift of all. And from that choice had grown everything that mattered. Love and family, purpose and belonging, happiness hard-won and deeply treasured. Fate knows better than letters do, Jackson had said all those years ago. And he had been right. The carefully written correspondence that brought them west had been full of lies and false promises. But the unwritten fate that brought them together had been true. As Natalie drifted into sleep, wrapped in her husband's arms, surrounded by the family they had built together, she sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For the mistake that had brought her west. For the courage that had made her choose a different path. For the love that had made everything else possible. The desert night stretched out around the ranch, vast and beautiful and full of possibility. And in the morning, as the sun rose over the Panamint Mountains, it would shine down on a family built not by careful arrangement but by brave choices and faithful love. A family that had begun with a cowboy's simple wisdom. That fate knows better than any letter, any plan, any carefully constructed promise. In the end, that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.